Hello students, I am Jana Denise Domingo and we will be talking about motivation. Our learning objectives for today's discussion is for us to define and discuss what motivation is, discuss the four major processes on how self-efficacy beliefs produce diverse effects, and explain how the goal-setting theory of information affects the performance of students. I know that you know what motivation is, but if I ask you what motivates you, can you really identify it immediately? What would be your answer? My fellow student, think about why you are currently in college. You know, motivation nowadays is hard to find for everyone, and with the current situation we are in, motivating students is a challenge all teachers face. Every classroom consists of a wide array of students, and each of them brings different student learning styles, different interests, and different life experiences. Did you know that as one of the most critical components of learning, motivation is also one of the most difficult to measure? What makes us learn? It is the willingness to put effort in learning. It is a product of many factors, ranging from the student's personality and abilities to characteristics of particular learning tasks, incentives for learning, settings, and teacher behaviors. Psychologists define motivation as an internal state that arouses, directs, and maintains behavior over time. The study of motivation focuses on how and why people initiate actions directed towards specific goals, how long it takes them to get started in the activity, how intensively they are involved in the activity, how persistent they are in their attempts to reach these goals, and what they are thinking and feeling along the way. In plain language, motivation is what gets you going, keeps you going, and determines where you are trying to go. Motivation is essential to the operation of organizations and classroom activities. The behavior is caused by the certain causes which relate to person's needs and consequences that results from acts, where motives are expressions of a person's needs and incentives, on the other hand, are external to the person. For other definitions of motivation, according to B.F. Skinner, motivation in school learning involves arousing, persisting, sustaining, and directing desirable behavior. And according to Woodworth, motivation is the state of the individual which disposes him or a person to certain behavior for seeking goal. Motivation also has characteristics, and here are the following: personal and internal feeling, art of stimulating someone, produces goal. Motivation can be either positive or negative. It is system-oriented, and it is a sort of bargaining. Some characteristics you observe yourself may not be included here, but it's fine as long as you know it. And for the classification of motivation, we have two: primary, basic or physiological needs, and secondary needs. For the first classification of motivation, it includes food, water, sleep, and etc. These needs arise out of the basic physiology of life, and these are important for survival and preservation of species. The next classification, the secondary needs, represent needs of the mind and spirit. For example, self-esteem, sense of duty, self-assertion, and etc. Conscious action arises from the needs. Needs create tensions that are modified. The relation of needs of action is shown. Individual needs, tensions or motives. Environment are wants, where tension, positive, negative incentives occur and the perception, and our action where the tension release. Now let's move on to the sources of motivation to learn. First is curiosity. Curiosity is a strong motivator of learning. Since people adapt rather quickly to surprising events, curiosity must be sustained in order to be a continuing source of motivation. To keep the learners alert, instructors can employ such strategies as varying their tone of voice, using relevant humor occasionally, and etc. Number 2, learning task relevance. It is where students are more motivated to learn things that are relevant to their interest. Number 3 is the goal setting. Goal setting is an important source of motivation. When individuals set goals, they determine an external standard to which they will internally evaluate their present level of performance. Setting goals improves self-motivation and performance to a greater extent. When learners set goals, they seek to gain favorable judgments of their competence or avoid negative judgments of their competence. The recommendation to foster learning goal orientation runs counter to much current educational practice, which attempts to instill learner confidence within a performance goal orientation. Number 4 is motive matching. Motive matching is the degree to which learning tasks meet particular students' needs or align with students' values. A need can be defined as any type of deficiency in the human organism or the absence of anything the person requires or thinks he requires for his overall well-being. The instructor should be sensitive to individuals' needs for achievement and for affiliation. And last is the self-efficacy. In here, it explains why motivation also comes from learners' beliefs about themselves. According to Bandura, self-efficacy involves a belief that one can produce some behavior independent of whether one actually can or not. Learners can be sure that certain activities will produce a particular set of outcomes. These expectations are referred to as outcome expectations. If there is self-efficacy beneficial for students mostly, there is also teacher efficacy. Ashton and Webb in 1986 defined teaching efficacy as the teacher's judgment about the potential influence of teaching on a child's learning. Personal teaching efficacy refers to the teacher's judgment of his or her own ability to motivate students. In other words, it is quite possible that teachers might believe that teaching has potentially powerful effects on students' motivation, but lack confidence that they themselves can affect their own students' motivation. Teachers with high personal efficacy tend to encourage student autonomy and responsibility, structure challenging learning tasks, and help learners succeed on those tasks. As an individual, we all have our needs and wants, and it's what drives us to do things. We tend to be motivated, and we are the only one who know what type of motivators we apply. And talking about the types or kinds, we have the intrinsic and extrinsic motivation.
Whether we're working, playing sports, or anything else that requires focus and effort, motivation has a huge impact on how well we perform. When it comes to motivation, there are two main types: intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation. Extrinsic motivation usually comes in the form of incentives that are provided externally by other people. In a workplace setting, these can be rewards, such as bonuses, extra holidays, or promotions, or punishments, such as criticisms, disciplinary actions, or being fired. In short, it's the classic carrot and stick approach. Intrinsic motivation, on the other hand, is what drives each person from within, the individual values and preferences that make doing a particular task more meaningful. Decades of psychological research have shown that intrinsic motivation is strongly linked to increased engagement, performance, and overall happiness. By making people's intrinsic motivations visible, Attuned helps companies align their employees' goals and values with their own, creating a culture of purpose, and ultimately making work more meaningful.
As future educators, it is very important what approach we are going to do to engage our students, for us to impart knowledge and make them learn. In classroom setting, again, motivation is the drive, will, or compulsion to do something. And we have two kinds: the intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation is doing a task for the pure enjoyment and satisfaction of doing it. Classroom examples: giving a student a choice to do a project based on their interest or passions, and teaching yourself something because it feels good to learn it. Intrinsic motivation is engaging to personally rewarding tasks, while extrinsic motivation is doing a task because completion of the task will lead to a reward or help you to avoid punishment. The classroom examples are providing a student with stickers on a sticker chart when they do a good job, and withdrawing privileges like free play if a student does not complete a task well enough. So this is where we are usually driven by money, fame, grades, and praises from others. These are the rewards being aimed. Now let's discuss these two kinds further. Starting with the intrinsic motivation. Intrinsic has the same origins as the word internal. When we have intrinsic motivation, our motivation comes from inside of us. We don't need someone providing the promise of reward or punishment for us to want to do something. There are three main forms of intrinsic motivation. First, intrinsic motivation to know. The idea that people experience positive sensations like enjoyment, pleasure, in learning new things. Second, intrinsic motivation towards accomplishment. The idea that people experience positive sensations, enjoyment, pleasure, when they have achieved something. Third, intrinsic motivation to experience stimulation. This is the idea that people experience positive sensations when they do tasks that are cognitively, physically, socially, or emotionally stimulating. Let me present an example where these three forms and other fields of motivation can be observed.
Do you ever wake up in the morning and feel like doing nothing? Do you ever just sit at your job or at school and just wish that the day would be over? Do you ever wish that you could be as motivated or self-disciplined as all these other people that you see on social media who always seem to be accomplishing their goals? Well, there is a very simple idea that will make you motivated every single day. And no, it's not some little mindset like being grateful or waking up early. This idea is real, and millionaires and athletes and high achievers have been using it for years to accomplish their goals. And I'm going to tell you what it is by sharing with you a very inspirational story. This is Dave. Dave is an 18-year-old boy who is in his final year of high school. David had a pretty difficult life growing up, where he lived with his father and his little sister. His mother passed away of cancer from a very early age. David's father had to work very hard in order to provide for the family, and the only time David got to see him was for like 15 minutes when he picked him up from school, because soon after that he had to start a second job. David found himself wanting to hang out with the older kids at his school because he saw them as the father figure that he didn't have, but unfortunately they would pressure him to do bad things like steal candy or steal cigarettes, and they would encourage him to skip school and party with them instead. His life was slowly heading in the wrong direction. But one night, after David had been out at a party, he came home to see two police cars in his driveway. As David walked to his house, he noticed that the main window was broken. He walked inside and saw two policemen talking to his little sister, who was crying. "Are you David?" the policeman said. Yeah. What's going on here? Where's my dad?" "Son, take a seat." The officer went on to explain that two burglars had attempted to break into their home, and that David's father happened to be awake. As a result of him trying to defend himself against the burglars, one of the burglars decided to take his father's life. David was in complete disbelief. The policeman's words didn't seem real. They themselves didn't seem real. This was literally a nightmare. In a matter of hours, David had now become the man of the house, and he had no family to turn to, he had very little money, and he now had to figure out a way to take care of himself and his little sister. Otherwise, they would be homeless and hungry. David was forced to drop out of school, and he immediately took on a full-time job at the local mechanic shop, where he had been working part-time. He would be there there all day and just clean the dirty car parts and sweep the dirty floors. After work, he would come home, buy his little sister some cheap food, and then help her with her homework. He then cleaned the house, paid the bills. He was doing everything that a normal parent would do. But after a few months, David started to run out of money, and he could barely afford to buy food. David tried getting a second job, but nobody really wanted to hire some kid who looked poor, who had little to no skills, and had no high school education. Things were beginning to get really dark for David. He loved his sister very much, and he just wanted her to have the best life possible. But right now, he felt lost and alone. One day at the mechanic shop, David went up to his boss and asked if there was something that he could do to earn more money. And his boss said, "Well, I cannot pay you any more for your current job, but one of our mechanics just quit, and I'm looking for a replacement. So if you know how to repair cars, you could maybe do that," his boss said. "Yeah, I have some experience," David said. "What, really? I was kind of kidding, to be honest. You've been working here for like 3 months and you were just telling me now that you know how to fix cars?" "Yeah, I don't know. I just thought that you didn't need a mechanic and I needed a job, so I was just doing my job," David said. Okay. Well, in 3 weeks, I'm putting 3 potential new mechanics through a test to see who can repair the same broken engine the quickest. And I don't see why you couldn't be the 4th mechanic. How does that sound? That sounds great. Thanks. Okay, well, if you need to brush up on your mechanic skills, you can read this book. It's basically the all-knowing guide to engine repair. And just so you know, this new job pays a lot more than your current job now. Later in the night, after his sister was all taken care of, David got out this massive book, and he thought to himself, if I can memorize every single thing in this book, maybe I can win this competition. Getting this job meant keeping himself and his little sister alive, and not getting the job meant being homeless and hungry. The stakes were very high. So for the next 3 weeks, David was glued to this book, and he read every single word 4 to 5 times, and he would close his eyes and pretend that he was putting together the parts that he was reading about, and he would visualize the problems to look out for and visualize how to solve them. Because he did not have any real car parts to practice on, he started to pay really close attention to the car parts that he would clean at his work. He would focus on the feeling of the metal in between his hands, and he would study every groove and every angle, and he would analyze where all the parts would fit together. Whenever David felt tired or he felt like he couldn't work anymore, he would just look at the hollow cupboards in his house where there was almost no food, and he would feel the cold air crawl up his spine because he could not really afford heating. But more importantly, he would look at his hungry, confused, sad little sister, who still could not really comprehend that both her mother and her father were gone. A hardship like that is not meant for a child. David had no choice. For the next 3 weeks, he barely slept, barely ate, barely drank. All he did was work. Finally, the competition day had come. David walked into the store and he saw the 3 other mechanics who all had their own tools, their own towels, their own cars. They looked very professional. "Hey kid, how are you feeling?" the boss said. "Yeah, I'm okay. If you need to use my tools to fix the engine, I'll leave them here for you." Guys, in front of you there is an engine, but there is a problem with this engine, and all of you have the exact same problem. And the first person to fix the problem and start the engine will be hired for the new job here. Does this make sense? Everybody nodded with confidence while David's heart trembled. "Okay, I will be in my office. I will come out when I hear an engine start. Start working right now." The 3 other mechanics all started to work right away. David could hear the tools clanking against the cold hard metal of the engine, and he could hear the grunts of the other men, and he could see the sweat coming down from their face. But David just looked at his engine for a moment, simply studying it. He could still see the sections in his book that talked about the most common problems in an engine, so he just slowly and systematically worked his way down the mental list. In the corner of his eye, he noticed that his boss was staring at him. As he worked on the engine, images of his little sister popped into his head. He could still remember very clearly coming home and seeing the cop cars and seeing the shock and fear on his little sister's face. She was his motivation. After some time, David had fixed a few of the basic problems and even some of the more advanced problems, but for some reason, it still would not start, and he could not really figure out why. As his hand came up to his face to wipe the sweat off his head, he noticed that his hand was really dirty, like really dirty to the point of it being a little bit strange. He looked at where his hand was laying on the engine and he noticed that it was on something called the fuel filter. Then instantly he remembered a headline in his book called "Why a Clogged Fuel Filter Will Ruin Your Car." The filter is clogged. That's it. That's why it's not starting, David thought to himself. He frantically started to clean the filter, going as fast as he could. He could even feel a smile growing on his face while he was doing it, because he knew that once he did this, that the car would start. Every time that his heart would beat, the smile on his face became a little bigger and bigger. He was about to do the impossible. But then he heard it. The other mechanic's engine had started. The boss came out, shook the other mechanic's hand, and said, "Well done. Come into my office and let's have a chat. David, could you please clean everything up here?" In 5 short seconds, David's heart had shattered into pieces. As he started to clean everything up, tears filled his eyes. All the work he put in and all the pain that he went through was all for nothing. What am I going to do now? How am I going to provide for my sister? What about the rent and the heating? What am I going to do for the winter? Thoughts like this were racing through David's head. A few hours later, after the winning mechanic had signed the contract to work there, the boss called David into the office. "So, I looked at your engine. You almost had it, eh? You just didn't clean the fuel filter in time." "Yeah." Being fast is a really important trait as a mechanic. People want their cars fixed quickly. "Yeah, I get that." You know, when you said you wanted to become the 4th mechanic here, I actually did a little bit of research into you, and I read what happened to you and your family in the newspaper, and I'm very sorry for what happened. David said nothing. "David, I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to be really honest with me, okay?" Okay. "Did you lie to me when you said you knew how to fix cars?" David looked down for a moment. No." His boss just stared at him. "Yes, I lied." "Okay, so I'm guessing you lied to me because you really wanted the job because of the extra money in order to take care of yourself and your little sister. Is this true?" "Yes. So your solution was to just say you knew how to fix cars, and then luckily I gave you my book, and then you studied it, and then you came in here to compete against the real mechanics." "Yes." Wow, that is very bold of you, and really impressive that you actually managed to fix a car engine with little to no real experience. You must be a really fast learner. "Well, I was pretty familiar with all the car parts. I mean, I clean them all day, every day." "And you're modest. That is a really good trait." "Sir, with all due respect, why are we talking about this? I lost. I saw the other mechanic sign the contract to work here. What's there to talk about?" "Yes, you did technically lose, and there's no way I will hire a mechanic with little to no real experience." David looked down, his heart still in pieces. "But I'm actually here to offer you something different." David perked up. "I want you to be my assistant and work under me for a while. I have never seen someone learn about cars that fast before, so you must have some talent, and you certainly have the motivation to work hard due to your family situation, but you do need some guidance." Okay, what does this mean?" "Well, I definitely cannot pay you a full mechanic salary, but I will give you a raise to help take care of your home situation right now. Just the basics like food, heating, etc. And once you become an expert and a real mechanic, I'll start to pay you more. But there's one condition." "Okay, what is it?" "You can never lie to me again about anything. The only reason why I'm making an exception for your past lie is because I know you just wanted to take care of your family, and I understand that. So, do we have a deal?" "Yes, I'll never lie again. I'll be the hardest worker. I'll do anything you want me to do." "Okay, great. Well, show up every day at 6 a.m. and be ready to work really hard." And from that point on, David became obsessed with cars. Whenever he was not taking care of his sister, he would be reading books about cars. He would talk to other mechanics, go to car conventions. This was the thing that gave him and his little sister a real shot at life. After 6 months, David had become one of the head mechanics at the shop, outperforming all the senior mechanics. Then fast forward another 6 months, and he had become one of the most skilled mechanics in the city because he was so desperate and eager to learn more and more that nobody could keep up with him. In 1519, there was a man named Hernan Cortez who set out on a mission to take over an island with 500 of his men. When they got to the island, they faced other people who did not want them to be there. Cortez then then ordered his men to burn the boats that they came in on, so there was no option to retreat. The only options were either to live or to die. Oftentimes, when it comes down to life or death situations, people discover an inner drive and new skills that they never knew they had. David was forced into a situation where he had to either sink or swim. He had to figure out a way to either provide for his family or to be homeless and hungry, which is pretty much like life or death. If you are watching this video and you have an inclination to start your own business or to have a certain type of body, you might have to implement this burn the boats concept. Burning the boats for you could be quitting your job, then figuring out a way to pay your bills on your own, or maybe it's moving out of your parents' house and then refusing to take financial assistance from your parents or your friends. Maybe it's giving your friend $5,000 and then saying to him, if I don't have a six-pack in 8 months, you can keep the money. Doing this will force you to figure out a way to become successful because failure is no longer an option. This strategy is not for everybody though, and you certainly need to set realistic goals and you need to be careful, but some people need to do this in order to succeed.
David is the subject who experienced challenges and cope with it, with his desires to survive. Would you do the same as David? I guess yes, but at the same time is no. For we have different approaches to such circumstances, and there are pros and cons that we consider as a person. Some of the benefits of intrinsic motivation are: students will come into the classroom excited for the day of learning. School will appear exciting and engaging for students. Students will do the task without fuss and without misbehaving. And some of the limitations of intrinsic motivation exist. Some activities are just plainly boring but need to be learned. You'll need to find alternative ways to motivate students to learn this content. Things we are interested in are not necessarily the most valuable things to learn about. And most schools have a standardized curriculum which limits our freedom to learn what we are intrinsically motivated about. Also, in classroom, students likely to be intrinsically motivated if they attribute their educational results to factors under their own control, also known as autonomy or locus of control. Believe they have the skills to be effective agents in reaching their desired goal, also known as self-efficacy beliefs, and are interested in mastering a topic, not just in achieving good grades. According to White, Ryan, and Rump, Deci, 2000, intrinsic motivation reflects the desire to do something because it is inherently interesting or enjoyable. The urge or desire to do something comes from within because it either brings them pleasure or thinks it is important or feel that what they are learning is significant. Like David, in order to provide for his sister and survive hunger, he uses his desire to succeed. Then, there's the what-ifs, like if their father was not killed, what would happen? If David lived with his sister? If he did not work? There are so many questions, but instead, he passed through the challenge of life. Remember that there are advantages and disadvantages in every decision and action we make. The advantage: intrinsic motivation can be long-lasting and self-sustaining. It leads to promote student learning focused on the subject matter. While the disadvantage: efforts of fostering intrinsic motivation can be slow to affect behavior and can require special and lengthy preparation. As an instructor, a future educator, there are multiple ways for us to foster intrinsic motivation in our students. Some of these include the following. First, create a student-centered classroom. When students are involved in their own learning, they are more intrinsically motivated. Allow students to have a say in the course where possible and try to incorporate an active learning activity every 15 to 20 minutes. Second, promote a mastery goal rather than a performance goal. If students are motivated to gain mastery rather than simply aiming for a performance goal, they are more likely to invest more effort into their own learning. Therefore, try to foster in students a goal of becoming fluent in Spanish or any other language rather than having them focus on getting an A in the class. In addition, they emphasize grades and emphasize the intrinsic rewards of learning. Third, encourage students' actions, not their character or person. By using statements of encouragement like, your answers showed thought, as opposed to you are good thinker, students are more likely to remain intrinsically motivated. Focus on their effort, not their innate ability. With that, avoid using statements that suggest that innate ability is all that is required to complete a project. Direct students' attention to the process of completing the project and the effort involved, rather than on the end product. Fourth, provide learning goals. Research has shown that when teachers give learners a goal, students experience a boost in self-efficacy. By providing clear learning goals at the beginning of class or before an activity, students may be more intrinsically motivated to work toward these goals. Fifth, have high but realistic expectations for students. Davis 2009 noted that instructors' expectations can have a powerful effect on students' performance. She notes that standards should be set enough to challenge students and motivate them to do their best without being so high that students feel they are unattainable. If students believe achievement is within their grasp, they will work toward that goal. When we teach, these samples of intrinsic motivation in the classroom could be used and be our guide as well. You may take note of this. Number 1, student-led inquiry learning. Inquiry learning based on students' personal interest can really liven up a classroom. This is because students get the opportunity to explore topics that they are genuinely interested in and excited about. If you've got to stick to a curriculum, you might still be able to embrace student-led aspects by finding ways to link curriculum outcomes to our students' interests. This approach requires us, the teachers, to know our students well and reflect on how we can cater our curriculum to the interests of students. Start by asking your students what they want to learn about or what their passions are. Then brainstorm ways to weave this into your curriculum. Number 2, sparking inspiration. Being inspired is one of the greatest motivators out there, and the best thing is it comes from within. You don't need any rewards or punishments to inspire students. In fact, you need to take a completely different approach. To inspire students about the content, you need to find ways to show how what the students are learning about is amazing, revolutionary, or life-changing. Inspired students see potential in educational topics. Even adults can be inspired and try to do things they become interested in. Number 3, promoting task satisfaction. By this, we mean that people can have positive sensations when they feel like they completed a difficult task well. It is observable especially during and after exams of students. To make a task satisfying, make sure that it's not too easy and not too hard. A great way to hit that sweet spot of making a task satisfying is to use Vygotsky's zone of proximal development. According to Vygotsky, teachers should assess a student's prior knowledge and develop a lesson that builds on their prior knowledge. If the lesson teaches things the student already knows, they will be bored and unmotivated. But if the content is too hard, they'll also be bored and unmotivated. To solve this problem, Vygotsky proposes that we should teach content that is too hard for a student to do alone but easy enough for them to do with assistance. Like asking to the more knowledgeable others, like teachers, parents, or peers. Looking on educational technologies may do also. Example is YouTube. And assisting using scaffolds in teaching like prompting, open-ended questioning, and modeling. Number 4, sparking curiosity. We can't always teach something that's a student's favorite subject. Sometimes content is a little bland or boring. So how do we instill intrinsic motivation in students when teaching this sort of content? It is recommended trying to spark a sense of curiosity in the students. Sometimes all we need is an engaging hook to get students paying attention and genuinely interested in doing the task. One way you could do this is to turn a lesson into a detective scenario, provide clues, and ask the students to seek their own answers. Another way is to find some really interesting or catchy information about a topic. For example, if you're teaching about spiders, you could find a really interesting fact about spiders' legs or how many eyes they have. This might spark some curiosity in students. You can also show them models or videos about it for them to be engaged more. A lot of these curiosity-sparking strategies are the sorts of strategies we might also use in the introduction to an essay to get a reader interested and wanting to read more. Number 5, feeling good after practicing a skill. Sometimes it's just feels good to practice. Am I right? Sometimes learning is like going to the gym. If you haven't done it in a while, you're not going to have fun. It will hurt. You'll feel bad about yourself, and you might not go back for a while. But once you're on a roll and doing it on a regular basis, it starts feeling great. Consider getting your students to do some exercises early every morning to get their minds running and get them in the process of practicing learning. Hopefully, after time when they get on a roll, they'll start feeling good about it. It is applicable in many aspects of life. Number 6, enjoying the process of learning. Some students just love learning. It's that simple. It doesn't matter what you give them to do, they'll tackle the task with enthusiasm. I think one of the most obvious examples of this is people who love to read self-help books. These sorts of people just can't get enough of information that will make them a little smarter or help them learn a few more tricks. In trying our students to instill a love of learning is to help students get a few wins under their belt. Work with them to overcome intellectual challenges and celebrate with them when they achieve their learning goals. These wins will give students first-hand knowledge of the sense of accomplishment that comes from learning something new. Do you enjoy working in groups? Some of us hate group work, some of us love it. And that is our number 7, enjoying working in groups. But working in groups can be a really intrinsically fulfilling way to learn. Social interaction is something most humans crave. It gives us benefits like an overall more positive outlook on life, a sharper mind from being challenged by peers, and a sense of belonging and community. So working in groups can be a great way to turn a difficult or bland task into one that is enjoyable to complete. The sense of community while completing the task can buoy us. Students can somehow feel connected on having a group or team to rely and share experiences, even academic problems with. Number 8, wanting to beat your personal best. A desire for self-betterment comes from within. Sometimes it hasn't got to do with wanting to be smart for when you talk to someone you have a crush on or so you can get a job in the future. Some of us just want to be our very best. In the humanist theory of learning, Maslow calls this the desire for self-actualization. Students who want to be better themselves have an intrinsic desire to learn. After discussing intrinsic motivation, let us move on to the next kind of motivation. Extrinsic motivation comes from the influences outside of the individual in the form of reward or punishment. Common extrinsic motivation is rewards, money or high grades, for showing the desired behavior and the threat of punishment following misbehavior. Competition is considered an extrinsic motivator because it encourages the performer to win and to beat others, not simply to enjoy the intrinsic reward of the activity. A cheering crowd and the desire to win a trophy are also extrinsic incentives. Extrinsic has the same origins as the word external. Extrinsic motivators are therefore things that are external to ourselves that motivates us. Again, our extrinsic motivation doesn't come from inside of us. Rather, the motivation is based on an outsider providing an external stimulus. An external stimulus could be one of the following. First, positive reinforcement. We do a task in order to get a reward. An example might be getting a chocolate for completing a task. Next, punishment. We do a task in order to avoid being given a punishment. A punishment might be being forced to do extra homework if we don't complete the task. Lastly, negative reinforcement. We do a task in order to avoid losing something we already have. This is a form of punishment, but instead of being given a punishment such as additional homework, a privilege is taken from us. An example is losing playtime during lunch break. There are also pros and cons in extrinsic motivation, and here are some of the benefits. Students find encouragement to complete tasks that are uninteresting yet necessary. Tasks can be split into regular, manageable intervals with rewards provided intermittently throughout the process. Can be very effective, especially for students with autism via the applied behavior management strategy of teaching. It is a transactional way to motivate people, where there is no pretense about trying to make an uninteresting task appear interesting. Then some of the limitations of extrinsic motivation are: rewards lose their effect over time, leading to decreased return on a teacher's effort. Rewards vary depending upon student. Teachers need to know their students well to cater rewards effectively. Many forms of punishment are considered unethical these days. Be very careful with using punishments in classroom environments. Students are unlikely to remember school fondly when they are not encouraged to love learning for its own sake. Extrinsic motivations are embraced in behaviorist theory. Behaviorist theorists like B.F. Skinner believe that you can teach a child anything if you give them strong enough incentives and disincentives. Behaviorist theories don't take into action the type of our emotions, cultural origins, cognitive factors, or social factors that might motivate us. They simply think that learning occurs through reward and punishment. Like an intrinsic, extrinsic also has advantages and disadvantages. Advantage: the use of extrinsic constraints, such as the threats of punishment against performing an activity, has been found to increase one's intrinsic interest in that activity. Disadvantage: extrinsic rewards can lead to over-justification and a subsequent reduction in intrinsic motivation. There are times that the provision of extrinsic rewards might reduce the desirability of an activity. We can all identify examples of intrinsic and extrinsic motivation in our everyday lives, and we know that these types of motivation feel very different. Here are the extrinsic motivation examples in the classroom. Number 1. Token reward systems. In our discussion, let's include activities with point systems. These points are an extrinsic motivator. The point system is designed to give a student an incentive to do something well. Do a good job, and you will earn points, which may, if you collect more of them than your other classmates, you will have a reward or prize after the class. Number 2. Classroom sticker or star charts. Another good external motivator is a star chart. It's really common in early years classrooms as motivators. Young kids love stickers. They tend to share and show it with pride. We could buy sticker chart or make one yourself. Small things will be appreciated if was used and delivered in a very interesting manner. Number 3. Food. Well, why not? Food is a great motivator for students. In fact, it is recommended in college students to motivate themselves while studying. If you're an educator, you'll need to be very careful not to use unhealthy foods or foods that children are allergic to. Personally, I experienced this during practice demos before. Free food! But make sure to instruct them, your students, not to litter and just eat it in ways that it's not distracting them and their studies. Number 4. Guilt trips. Guilt trips are a form of negative reinforcement. A reminder that if you fail, you lose something you like. It wasn't going to get anything tangible out of being good as a kid. no one was going to give a candy or a toy. This guilt trip reinforcement in good kids at school all the time exists. Children see themselves as good kids and don't want to lose that, so they do things they don't want to do in order to keep up a reputation they have with their teacher and other people. This isn't an intrinsic motivator because students aren't necessarily doing things out of the pleasure of the task. They're doing something they don't want in order to get something out of it. In this case, a reputation of being good. Number 5. Game-based learning rewards. Educational computer games are well known for being based upon extrinsic motivators. When students finish a level, they win tokens, points, or level ups for completing their tasks. An example of this is the educational games like Duolingo, a language learning app. It is where you can level up towards a fluency level in your language. Another way educational computer games reward students is through sound and graphics. Like loud sounds that when a student wins an activity stimulate the learner and make them want to try again, to get the same stimulation once again. This is a lot like how a gambling machine in a casino gets you coming back for more. Then, the bright flashing lights that attracts learners' attention can also be used to get learners addicted to the thrill of winning. These are still extrinsic motivators because students are playing the games to achieve the extraneous stimulation of gameplay, not for the fun of the activities themselves. Number 6. The Premack Principle. It argues that people will do an activity they don't want to do if they are bribed with a more desirable activity that follows. The Premack Principle is often known as Grandma's Rule. Eat your vegetables and then you can have your dessert. In the classroom, teachers often bribe students with a fun activity as the last activity at the end of the day or week. If students do all of their work well throughout the day without misbehaving, they might get to play a game of their choice. Number 7. Praise. Praise is simple but it works really well. Students often crave praise and will work on a task they aren't necessarily all that interested in if they think they will get some praise from it. However, as teachers, we should also think about what is actually praiseworthy. Here are some forms of praise that could be demotivating, in short, which we have to avoid. Praising too much. If you praise too much, then the praise will lose all its meaning, and students will stop seeing your praise as all that motivating. And disproportionate praise. If you praise one child more than others, the others will stop seeing your praise as genuine. Often we have children who misbehave regularly and we end up lowering our standards for them. We find ourselves praising them for tasks that should be expected. Instead, go with a simple thank you for tasks that are expected. Then, here are some forms of praise to consider. A smile and nod. Sometimes simple is best. Your student will be made to feel like you've given them a special little bit of recognition without being insincere or over the top about it. And proportionate praise. Make sure your students know that high praise is hard to come by, but use it when something is genuinely praiseworthy. If a student amazes you, consider calling students' parents and let them know how well they did. Number 8. Threats of physical punishment. It is not the actual physical punishment. In fact, in most Western countries, physical or corporal punishment is very much illegal in schools. But nonetheless, it is an example of an extrinsic motivator. If a child knows or believes they will receive physical punishment for doing something wrong or getting a low mark on an exam, they might work extra hard to succeed. Harsh punishments may cause emotional, physical, and psychological harm. Students may drop out and will experience traumas. As teachers, we should really be careful. Number 9. Threats to remove privileges. Here are some common sorts of privileges teachers give to students at schools. Being allowed to do tasks only assigned to trustworthy students, such as handing out worksheets or being sent to another classroom to send a message. Being allowed to go on an end-of-year excursion. Getting to use certain toys, play equipment, or access to play areas. Students who feel that they will have privileges removed if they do not complete a task, they may feel increased motivation to complete the task. Lastly, number 10, whole group accountability. This is another one that works really well, but again, it needs to be done appropriately. Here sometimes I feel this strategy works well. When students need to work as a team in order to complete tasks, when interdependence and group work are clear aspects of the learning scenario, when the reward is not of significant consequence. And here sometimes the strategy causes resentment between students. When one misbehaving student holds the whole class back, even though the rest of the students did nothing wrong. And when students genuinely tried their hardest but feel they've been punished for no reason. Nonetheless, this can be a good way of getting the students to self-regulate as a group and apply peer pressure on each other to do well. I hope I made myself clear about intrinsic and extrinsic type of motivation. Moving on to the perspectives of motivation. We have 4. Trait perspective. Motivation is an enduring personality characteristics which people have differing amounts. Behaviorist perspective. Motivation influences how people behave in order to obtain reinforcing outcomes or avoiding punishment. Social cognitive perspective. Motivation is anchored on the goal people strive for, their expectations, and self-efficacy. And number 4, the cognitive perspective. Motivation is a framework of the mind that is stimulated by curiosity. After the perspectives, here are the approaches to motivation. Motivation is a vast and complicated subject encompassing many theories. Some theories were developed through work with animals in laboratories. Others are based on research with humans in situations using games and puzzles. And number 1 approach is behavioral approach. It motivates students through extrinsic means by giving incentives, rewards, or punishment. And the humanistic approach is number 2, that motivates students through intrinsic approach by encouraging students' sense of competence, self-esteem, autonomy, and self-actualization. In this approach, Maslow's theory is a very influential humanistic explanation of motivation. Abraham Maslow in 1970 suggested that humans have a hierarchy of needs, ranging from lower-level needs for survival and safety to higher-level needs for intellectual achievement and self-actualization. When these needs are satisfied, the motivation for fulfilling them decreases. When they are met, a person's motivation does not cease. Instead, it increases to further fulfillment, unlike the deficiency needs can never be completely filled. The strive for improvement is always there in the individual. Maslow's theory has been criticized because the people do not always appear to behave as the theory would predict. Sometimes people get motivated by many different needs. At the same time, all the needs are interrelated. Number 3, cognitive approach. It motivates students to be curious in searching for information, solving problems, and independent thinking. Cognitive theories believe that the behavior of an individual is determined by the thinking process and not by rewards and punishment. Behavior is initiated and regulated by plans, goals, schemas, and expectations and attributions. People respond to their interpretations of the external events or physical conditions. Cognitive theories emphasize on intrinsic motivation. It is the cognitive explanation that describes the individual's explanations, justification, and excuses about self and others that influence motivation. And it is how Bernard Wiener propounded the theory of attribution. Wiener gave 3 dimensions of the attributed causes for success and failure. The 3 dimensions are the locus, stability, and controllability. Locus can be internal or external. It is closely related to self-esteem of the individual and also to sense of taking responsibility. If success or failure is attributed to internal factors, success will lead to pride and increased motivation, whereas failure will diminish self-esteem. The stability dimension is related to the expectancy about the future. If the attribute for failure is stable, like how aptitude, then the expectancy of failure in future increases, and if the attribute is unstable, like mood, then the expectancy of failure is less. Controllability factor is related to emotions such as anger, shame, pity, gratitude, and etc. When failure is attributed to lack of ability and ability is considered uncontrollable, the sequence of motivation is failure, lack of ability, uncontrollable, not responsible, shame, withdraw, performance declines. When failure is attributed to lack of effort, a controllable cause, the sequence is failure, lack of effort, controllable, responsible, guilt, engagement, performance improves. Number 4, social cognitive approach. It motivates students to work toward a goal with emphasis on its value and expectation. Number 5, socio-cultural approach. It motivates students to engage in activities that strengthen their interpersonal relations. The socio-cultural perspective emphasizes on participation, identities, and interpersonal relations within communities of practice. People engage in activities to maintain their identities and their interpersonal relations within the community. To sum it up, here are the 4 views of motivation. Okay, I hope you learned something from our discussion today. And before ending our class, I'd like you to watch this life-changing clip about motivation.
The story you're about to hear is going to change everything in your life. It will change the way you think, the way you work, the way you relax, how you socialize. It will change every single aspect to your existence here on Earth. This is David, and David was a very nice young man who followed a very traditional path in his life. He did well in school, he went to college, he got a traditionally good job, and he met a very nice girl. David was the type of guy who always did what he was supposed to do. But one day, something awful happened to David that would change the course of his life forever. After his 30th birthday, David went to the doctor's office to get his annual blood test done. A few days later, David received a phone call from his doctor saying that they found an irregularity in his blood and that he needed to get an MRI scan done as soon as possible. The next day, David went in to get it done. He was sitting in the medical room waiting for the doctor to come in to tell him his results. The longer he waited, the faster his heart began to beat, and he could literally feel and see the sweat droplets crawling down his face inch by inch. Every minute that went by felt like an eternity. The door opens, David sees the doctor, and he immediately could tell that something was off just based on his empty expression. "Hello, David," the doctor said. "Hi," David says. "David, there's no easy way to say this. We have found a cancerous tumor in the back of your brain. Fortunately, it's not too big, and if we get it out as soon as possible, we don't think there will be any further complications. However, it is a very dangerous procedure." With shock and fear in his voice, David says, "What kind of risks?" "Well, the tumor is very close to your brainstem, so if we make a wrong move, you could experience long-term brain damage, which would impair many different things, like the way you speak, the way you think, your memory. You may even forget the people who you love in your life. But if we don't do this procedure, you will likely die in the upcoming years." Tears began falling down David's face. "I know this is hard, but I can book you in for a surgery 1 week from today with one of the best neurosurgeons in the entire country. Do you want me to book it?" The doctor said. I guess so," David said. Good luck. My prayers are with you, the doctor said. The following days would prove to be the most confusing days of his life. This situation made David reflect on all the major choices that he had made in his life, like going to school, choosing his career, his girlfriend, even the city he lived in. He literally thought of everything, and the only feeling that he really felt was this weird, dull emptiness that he couldn't even really put into words. The days leading up to the surgery, David completely isolated himself because whenever he saw someone that he loved, he was just reminded of the fact that he may forget them. It was now time for the surgery. David laid there on the white medical bed in the operating room waiting to be put to sleep. The idea that these doctors were going to cut his head open and then go into his brain with their little tools to remove a lump of tissue that was slowly killing him was both unbelievable and terrifying to him. The doctor came in, looked right into David's eyes and said, "It's time. When I put this mask on your face, it will release a gas that will put you to sleep. Start counting backwards from 10, starting now. 10, 9, 8, 7... David had fallen asleep for potentially the last time in his life. While David was asleep, he began to dream. Random memories came fluttering back to him, some good, some bad, but even in his dreams, that confused, empty feeling still haunted him. Within his dream state, David suddenly found himself appear in a totally black room with just him and a mirror. He walked over to the mirror and he began to stare at himself. "Hello," his reflection said. "What? Hello?" David said in shock. "Don't be scared. This is just a dream. Plus, I'm not actually you," the image said. "Right, this is just a dream," David thought to himself. "Well, you certainly look like me and you sound like me. If you're not me, then who are you?" David said. "I'm who you think you are," the image said. "I'm who you think you are? What does that even mean?" David said. "I'm the person who you think you are," the image said. "You just said the same thing twice," David said. "Sorry, I'll be more clear. I am the accumulation of all the voices that you have internalized from other people, like your parents, your friends, and society, who all wants you to conform to what their idea of who you should be. To put it simply, I'm the person who the world has told you to be, and unfortunately, it looks like you have listened to them." David looked down for a moment, still feeling confused. "I'm the person who the world has told you to be," David thought to himself. "So you're saying I'm fake?" David said. "Well, I'm the one who is truly fake. The real you is still inside you, and it will always remain in you until the day you die. But yes, in this moment, you think you are me, but you aren't." Okay, so if I think I'm you, who is a fake person, but I'm not actually you, then who am I? That is a great question. You should probably figure that out before you actually die for real. Oh, did you hear that? Looks like our time is up. I sure hope you stop listening to everyone so you can finally start living your own life. David wakes up. The surgery was a success. He is now physically healthy. When David got home from the hospital, he just sat in his room trying to absorb everything that had just happened. He was confused, happy, angry, all mixed into an emotional cocktail. As he was feeling all of this, he once again saw his reflection in the mirror in his room. He began to stare at himself very intensely, just like he had in his dream. But this time, nobody spoke to him. Then suddenly, David began to feel very, very emotional. But this time, it wasn't that empty or confused feeling that he had experienced before the surgery, but rather, it was this powerful feeling of loss and sadness because for the first time in his entire life, he realized that he had no idea who he really was or what he wanted out of his life. He felt like a lost human being. And this is how most people live their whole lives. They pick a career that they don't really like. They choose a partner that their friends or their family will tell them is a good one, and they will choose a value system that social media or society tells them is a virtuous one. Most people live a life that is not their own. They are being fake without even being aware of it. World-famous psychologist Donald Winnicott calls this fake person the false self, and being infected infected with the false self is the reason why so many people wake up at the age of 80 filled with regret, because they realize that the life they had just lived wasn't actually the life that they wanted. If every single person on earth got rid of their false self and truly understood themselves, they would know exactly the type of career they would want to have, or the type of spouse or partner they would want to be with. They would know every single thing that they needed in order to be 100% happy. But most people will be infected with the false self disease until the day they die. And the only cure for this disease is that you have to stop listening to other people who tell you how you should live your life. And then once you do that, you have to become self-aware in order to figure out what type of life you want to live. It's better to live half a lifetime being the person who you truly are than to live 100 lifetimes pretending to be someone who you aren't.
Remember, be who you really are and do things you desire. Set a goal, then follow the steps. Trust the process and you'll definitely succeed. That is all. Thank you for listening. I am Jana Denise Domingo, your discussant. God bless.